one talk at a time. With the man never shortage for words. The man I model myself after every day here, Dr. Trinh.
Never shortage for words, huh?
I think you're talking about me.
Yeah, exactly. We are excited to welcome back Dr. Cornelius Grove from New York, actually.
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn,
Yes.
That's really New York. That's not New York, that's Brooklyn.
That's a lot of, that's right, huh? That's right. The city's completely different from the rest of the state, especially upstate. But yes.
That's a nice place to visit as well, upstate.
But he wouldn't want to live there. Go ahead.
Let's get a recap, Dr. Grove. You've been here a few times with us, had some really stimulating chats about our education system, and you have some really excellent ideas, and you have some books out. And I want to do a little recap so we can continue our chat for those who are kind of new to us here today. Go for it.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciated very much being back. This is my fourth appearance. I presume it's probably my final one. But in any case, this has been very enjoyable, all three, and I presume number four. My name's Cornelius Grove, and I am an interculturalist and an educator. I have a doctorate in education in intercultural communication, gained many years ago from Columbia University here in New York City. I never had a tenure track position in the university. I have taught at the university level, including in China. I'm what is often referred to as an independent scholar. I don't have a scholarly job at a university, but I do scholarly things, and that's what we're here to discuss today. My interest is at the intersection of education and cultural values. So that's what particularly has attracted me ever since the day of my doctoral dissertation. What got me going on the particular matter that we're going to be discussing again today is this question. Why do East Asian students, let me interrupt myself and say that East Asia generally is taken to mean China, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Korea. However, very little of the research that I'm going to be referring to has been carried out in Korea. Anyway, why do East Asian students always, over 50 years, always, no exceptions, outperform U.S. students on the international comparative tests? I don't have time to really discuss the international comparative tests. They've been going on for 50 years. And during all those years, every single time, every test, every grade level, East Asian students have been at or top or at or just very near the top of the scores, whereas American students have always been in the middle or sometimes even below the middle. Now, what we're going to be discussing, what we have been discussing, is not my own research. I'm relying on the research of anthropologists and other people using anthropological methods since 1970. The question of why East Asian students always outperform American students has galvanized scholars in the United States, in Australia, and eventually in the entire world to try to figure out why they always do better. There are, now I estimate, and I've had my nose in this material for a long time, I estimate that there are over 1,000 published research studies that look at this question And the important thing is here, they looked at it both in homes and in schools. That's very important. They didn't just say, how are schools different? They said, how are homes different? And they looked at that. So I've written 2 books on reporting the findings of these anthropologists and others. Both books are actually quite short. They're easy for the general reader to understand. That has been my purpose, really, to share the findings of anthropologists, which tend to be rather academically explained, with general readers, ordinary people with a reasonable amount of education. One of my books is called The Drive to Learn. It was published in 2017. It shares the anthropologist's findings about how East Asian parents raise students who excel. In 2020, I then published A Mirror for Americans, which shares the anthropologist's findings about how East Asian educators teach students who excel. My most basic conclusion has been, in explaining why East Asian students always excel, the home is more important than the school. That's another way of saying the culture, the values of the culture, which are inculcated in young people at home in their earliest years of life, is the most important single factor, I strongly believe, in explaining this discrepancy in scores, which has never been different, as I said. There are significant practices in East Asian homes and in schools that differ from the way we do educational things here in the United States. But the most important difference is in the underlying values of the 2 cultures. What I hope we can focus on today is the differences in the underlying values and how those values determine how students learn here and there.
Wow, that's a lot to take in.
Wow. What are these underlying values, and why are they different from the values we have?
I believe that the most fundamental difference, and I'm going to interrupt myself again here to say I am now writing another book, wow, which has brought me face to face with this value difference even more than I was when I did these 2 books. And there is a very fundamental difference in values between East Asian cultures and probably other Asian cultures as well, but I look particularly at East Asian cultures. For example, Dr. Trinh, I believe you're from Vietnam. I think a lot of this would be true of Vietnam, and there has been some comparable research in Vietnam as well. The fundamental difference is that we live in a highly individualistic culture. We focus on individuals in so many ways. I'm sometimes thinking of writing a book that just points out just the daily occurrences, ordinary occurrences at the home, in the school, on the job, on the social media, and on that explain that are examples of individualistic values and individualistic thinking and preferences and expectations. Whereas in East Asia and quite a few other cultures of the world, especially the ones I'm working with now, the fundamental values there are communitarian. There's another name for this. Collectivist is another word that's often used. I have tended to shy away from collectivist because I think in some people's minds it brings an image of, the Soviet Union.
Socialism.
Socialism. Okay. We're not talking politics here. We're talking the values by which we live. And so I shy away from using collective. Little ways, big ways, educational ways, home living ways, work ways is the group over the individual. Individual preferences, even in some cultures, and this is what I'm really getting into in the new book I'm working on, even what we would consider important individual needs really just aren't paid very much attention to at all. It's the health of the group, the harmony of the group, the unity of the group, the oneness of the group. And of course, since we're talking about education and children, the group that we're talking about is the family or the extended family. Of course, here in the United States, most often we're talking about a nuclear family, whereas in East Asia and other parts of the world, what we're talking about most often is an extended family, 3 generations, and sometimes even 4 generations under one roof or living in close proximity. And the welfare of that group transcends the needs, the preferences, the emotions of any individual member of that group. In order to be that way, they do need to be sort of hierarchical. You know, there has to be a leader, and in the great majority of cases, not 100%, it is the oldest male, or if the oldest male really is getting up to be too decrepit, you know, to really exercise this function, it would pass, or certainly after that person's death, it would pass to his eldest son in most cases. And I know some people will think, well, yeah, so you've got an autocracy. You know, this guy's just telling everybody what to do. But as a matter of fact, that's not actually true very often. The leader, the eldest male, or whoever it is, quite often confers before. Yes, he is the sole decision maker, but he quite often confers with his, at least with his wife or his oldest sons, and sometimes, you know, he takes into account the needs of everyone, and talks to people in most cases. I mean, obviously that could be an autocracy, but I think that research has shown that this isn't true in very many cases, quite a minority of cases. So that's the fundamental difference: individualism versus communitarianism.
In a communitarian model, the assumption is that somebody, the patriarch, is looking out for the best interest of the community and the
Absolutely.
family.
And in return, he gets loyalty. The loyalty is not just to him, and it is usually him, it's to the group. But he is the spokesperson and the decision maker for the group.
One of the things I noticed when we did a show years ago where we had somebody who focused on individual counseling for foreign exchange students.
Right.
Orange County has a large number of, mostly don't feel that the school systems is good there. We're talking about college and high school, the upper levels. And so they send their kids here with 3 hopes. 1, that they'll get a better education. 2, that they might learn English and learn a little more about us.
English.
And 3, the kids come because it's the first time they're out from under their parents' wings. Nobody's watching them minute by minute. And they get to explore who they are. A question many of them have never asked. What do I want to do? That's never been a consideration.
That's right. That is right. By the way, I was in the student exchange business for 11 years with American Field Service. So I have, and I did some research for American Field Service while I was there. So we looked into some of this.
And one of the anecdotal evidence, I don't know if there was any statistical evidence on this, but this person, that's what they did. They got hired by affluent Chinese mostly to mentor their kids and to teach them, right? To coach them they didn't even know how to navigate the educational system, much less how to be on their own. So they work with them, and these are very high-achieving kids. They couldn't come here otherwise. They had to pass high-level tests to get here. There was only a few slots, and there was fierce competition to get here. So they were already driven and successful parents. But what stunned me is, at the end of this term, the assumption is they would go back and take this knowledge of that they learned here in America. They would learn English and the knowledge of us to help the Chinese compete with us. Why not send our kids over and learn what we're doing so we'll understand them better in our competition, whether it's friendly or otherwise. We're in competition, each of us feel with these different societies. And how many of them didn't want to go back?
Yeah. What I would say about that is that I do believe, and all the reading and the experience I've had, that if you come from a communitarian culture and you're brought into an individualistic culture, such as, you're talking about right now.
Particularly California, the most individualistic of American cultures.
Well, maybe. For many, many people who do that, the individualistic culture is quite attractive.
Yeah, intoxicating almost.
Quite attractive.
Yeah.
But if they don't do that, people have lived out, millions and probably billions of people over centuries have lived out their lives in communitarian cultures. And in their communitarian way, they have lived a very satisfactory life.
Clearly.
They're not sitting around thinking, God, I wish I could, do this or marry that person, or, they find fulfillment. They have a good life. They enjoy themselves. It's just according to a different set of values.
I think the grass is always greener on the other side.
Maybe.
Right. So what's interesting is that, Southeast Asia, their academics, they're, from elementary to junior high to high school, excels compared to maybe American students. But with that knowledge that academically they teach better, or they learn better, or they learn better because of that home environment, everyone still go to us, Vietnam to study or Taiwan to study. Everyone wants to come here to study. But isn't it interesting that academically here, maybe the bar is lower, obviously, but everyone wants to come here despite that.
Well, while I was in graduate school, I was, of course, wrestling with these issues, taking courses, getting ready to do my dissertation, and so forth. And I became aware pretty quickly that there was, and I assume to some extent this might still be true, there was a truism about world education. And this is from the perspective of a parent who wants their child to have the best education in the world. The answer to how do you do that is send them to elementary school and junior high, send them to, the lower school below college, anywhere but the United States. Send them to university only in the United States.
Wow.
And one of the reasons for this is because the demands in other cultures at the lower levels, what you learn, how thoroughly you learn it. And this is, the kind of thing that I deal with in my book, A Mirror for Americans. How you learn things and the thoroughness with you learn them, and the amount that you learn is greater by far than it is usually in the United States. And this is why they do better on the international tests. But when children in many other cultures get to university, the university in Japan, if you get in and just go there and stay 3 or 4 years, you're, quite aside from whatever you do there, you're almost certainly going to get a really good job.
And that's an interesting, so let's dive into that for a second. That's been the hope and aspiration of the middle-class American forever. when my parents were born in the Great Depression, went through World War II, and came out in the sunshine of the 50s and the 60s and the growth of America, that was the definition of moving into the middle class. Not only you could own a home, but you could send your kids away to school. That was an impossible thing when they were young, and that became affordable, almost expected. Everybody's going to go to college now, almost like high school. And that used to be a guarantee. You got into a great university. That assumption has been knocked out of the system. There are too many kids coming out, even with great degrees from Stanford or Harvard or pick your poison. I went to the University of Michigan, great schools that have no job waiting for them.
Yeah, but I don't know that that's the university's fault.
No. Partly it might be the choices. You come out with a degree in French, there's a limited number of places you can go and use that. Right?
I would focus more on something I think is a national embarrassment, and that is that many universities, for the incoming freshmen, have to run remedial courses.
Well, that's true too. Yeah, they just can't read or write like they're supposed to.
Yeah, it just bowls me over.
Because that goes to the core of what you're talking about. At the lower secondary, primary and secondary levels, we don't teach rote memorization or rote skills anymore. We don't teach you to write. We don't teach you grammar. We don't teach you sentence structure. Those sorts of things that were drilled into me in Catholic school have, from what I've seen with my daughter and grandson, have largely been removed. A college was the individualistic part when I was young. That's where you got to challenge your mind. But by then you supposedly had mastered certain disciplines. You could count, you could do math, you could do science, you could do reading and writing. Those were drilled into us when we were young. And then finally, when you go to college, you get to be a free thinker. Now they're free thinkers from the third grade on.
So, but compared to most universities, this is a very big generalization, and it doesn't necessarily apply in every specific case. But compared to most universities abroad, the level of expectations in American universities are more stringent, more demanding for students than in many universities abroad. And so that's why the best education is anywhere but the United States for elementary and secondary, only the United States for university.
I'll ask one other question, I'll throw it back to Dr. Trinh. So the other thing that always astonished me about, you got me thinking about how, let's talk about the middle class or the upper middle class, educate their children. I think that's kind of what we're talking about, the people with high expectations, high goals, maybe the poor working classes, but maybe not so much. Education isn't maybe so stressed in any culture at that point. You're just going to get a job, support your family, stay in the neighborhood, repeat the life cycle, whatever you're in. Maybe I'm being harsh, but so I'm thinking this is more of a middle class or upper middle class, not necessarily just elite, but that kind of socially mobile group that wants to see their kids move up. And having said that, what they're willing to do with their kids and what I'm willing to do with my kids are dramatically different. Not just drive them, but send them away. I'm stunned that parents in China would send their children away to high school and college for 8 years and not be there every day for them. I can't imagine doing that with my daughter or my grandson, no matter what the opportunity it presented. I can't see sending my kid away to boarding school like they do in England in the middle or upper classes for their life. I want to be an integral part of their day-to-day living. And I don't think I could, as individualistic as I want them to be, I can't let go.
I think that's the value difference, where education is really, really high on the value system in East Asia compared to perhaps here. And so if education is your number one or two value, then you make that for your kid in the long run. So it's delayed gratification, right? I'm going to sacrifice now for a few years of not being with my kid, with the hope that their future will be much brighter than if I didn't send them away for a few years.
But Americans are willing to send their children away at some point to go make your way in the world. my father's great speech. When I left the Midwestern town I grew up in and moved to California, move west, young man, to find your fortune. They weren't happy about it. They would have mentioned Saigon, or that I wanted to go to college in Beirut. They would have said, no way.
Yeah. Well, I do believe, especially because of my experience in student exchange, which is some years ago now, that the number one driver is not so much the education, but becoming totally fluent in English.
Yes, maybe.
That, I believe, is the number one driver of this, because, and all over the world, they are interviewing people, local leaders, local politicians, local business people, and the American reporter just comes up with the mic and talks to them, and they talk back in English, and in many cases it's hardly even accented English.
Yeah, right.
So, or maybe it's got a British accent, because a lot of people speak Portuguese for a while. I lived in Portugal for a full year, and came back. I would say I had a good working non-Portuguese, but
and there's another interesting majority of middle-aged American for income kids from that background only speak English.
Yeah.
Their parents, the immigrants, have long since. That was maybe my grandparents or something. They're not first generation immigrants to the country. They're people that have worked their way up. The immigrants came, the second generation got a little better, and now into the middle class, and the third generation now is the aspirational one, where we're going to send our kids and they're going to become doctors and lawyers like my parents viewed it. My parents didn't go to college. My father was raised by an immigrant. So at some point, and none of that, never once was I ever told, or any of my friends or anybody else I know, go learn another language.
Yeah.
Maybe, but English, we have this dominance. They come prioritizing learning our language because it's the international language of business. And
yes, ironically, it's become the lingua franca.
Yeah, exactly. The lingua ingua, however you would say, lingua ingle, whatever it is. And so I don't think that, whereas it's prized in other countries, even in Europe, it's assumed because the borders are close and there's cross collaboration. People speak 2, 3, 4 languages all the time. In New York, where there's a large immigrant community all on top of each other, you go from block to block and they speak different languages. At least that's my perception. Once you get out of the Manhattan and into the boroughs, there is much more cultural fluency. But in middle America, boy, I don't know anybody that can speak more than one language. And those that did, because their parents came from somewhere else, the parents tell them, I had a friend of mine who was the child of immigrants, one of the few I knew, and his immigrant parents told him, don't ever speak our language in the house. We're Americans now.
Yeah. Point of pride. Listen, in terms of zeroing in on some of the values, and something that Dr. Trinh said just a little while ago about the importance of education. As a result of doing my book, The Drive to Learn, on how East Asian parents raise students who excel, I came away basically with 3 big takeaways, 3 big findings from my research into that body of research. Again, I emphasize this isn't my own research. I am reporting the work of others. Mm-hmm. And I have said very clearly that my conviction, I won't even say my impression, my conviction is that the number one reason why East Asian students outperform American students has to do with what's going on in the home. Right. And this in turn has to do with values, cultural values, the values that are shared by the people of a society. And I think the major part of this is that in East Asia, and even more broadly in Asia, and some other cultures as well, Jewish culture comes to mind, academic learning is extremely important, and someone's academic ability, academic prowess is especially of children coming up, is probably for most families the number one goal for that child.
And when they achieve it, there is an honor attached to them.
But not just to them. It's the honor.
During the fall of Saigon, on the helicopters being lifted out, the whole being ripped out from one culture and transported into another. And since then, he's risen through the American dream from, I'm assuming, rather humble beginnings. He's never really talked about what life was like when he came here, but I'm assuming they didn't have much. And now he's a doctor. Therefore, you would think that's the epitome of every Asian parent's dream. We came here with nothing.
A little quacky, but
A little quacky. But we came here with nothing. We sacrificed everything. And at least I can look to this. We have this legacy of achievement in our family. Yeah. Has that created an overflow of prestige and importance for your family that you achieve that? Or are they just Americanized now and it's like, do whatever you want to do?
No, Dr. Cornelius is absolutely correct. The identity is not necessarily the individual identity, but the family identity. Whether you succeed or you fail, that identity and that success or failure is imputed onto the family, and oftentimes beyond the nuclear family. And so it's very interesting. You're absolutely correct. I mean, I've always grown up living and believing that way, but I've never really distinguished and separated it until you bring up these issues. And it's true among many Asian families.
So now Dr. Trin's Americanized because he's mostly spent, how old were you when you came here? 10 or 11 or something?
No, I was like 5 or 6.
5 or 6. Okay. So even harder to remember. To you, America's, this is everything. You're just an American from
pretty much.
You certainly act and talk. So now you raise your own kids, and you've said in the last couple episodes with Dr. Cornelius, you're kind of conflicted. Yeah, you'd like to see your kids succeed and become doctors and lawyers and, and all the captains of industry and all that kind of stuff. But you're really more about making them well-rounded and letting them find their way and giving them all this. You sound so California, so American, so
a little bit of both. A little bit of both. So their success in school and life is, we take family pride over that, right? We take family pride over that. Is our success. Yet, we tell them to pursue their passion. We don't, we're not like, you have to be a doctor or a lawyer. That's not us. We're not into the position equals prestige. Right. We want them to follow their passion. And at the same time, we still hold the values and the culture that their success is our success. So it's
so there's a communitarian pride and a feeling of accomplishment that our kids didn't become bums and aren't sitting on the couch, but at the same time, go be a bum and wander the world and do what you want if that's what you want to be. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so we live in this hybrid where we grew up with this culture, from our parents and our family from Vietnam, and everything is family related as opposed to the individual. But here we are in the States, and we want to follow our passion, and so it's interesting to kind of be in that middle somewhere.
So it brings my last question. We told I don't want to be a bomb thrower and challenge Dr. Grove because I really agree with a lot of what he's saying here. But the counter, if I can play the devil's advocate, the counter narrative would be, so what? So our kids don't score well on math and science and tests, but they're creative thinkers, they're individuals, they're Bill Gates, they're going to drop out of stupid Harvard. Who needs stupid Harvard? They're just going to create $1 billion on their own. I'll go one step further. I have a very successful, I won't call him out, but we have a gentleman does a show on our network here, and he's worth a lot of money, and he's been very successful. And yet, if you got him on this show, he'd say, college, baloney. Education, worthless. Just get them out and get them working and get them building something and get them creating, and that's where the value is.
Interesting.
This is a point of view with which I'm familiar. Some very important leaders in education, especially Diane Ravitch. Dr. Diane Ravitch is associated with this view. And I'm not sure that she would go so far as to say college is worthless or anything. But
yeah, I'm emphasizing it. But, it's a general feeling that's not that important. Get out and get working.
Get
doing.
The thing about it is, I guess I would say this. There are several so we've sort of created a dichotomy here, and I think it's fair to some extent, because whereas in East Asia, people parents and extended families by and large tend to emphasize formal education, hard studying, committed studying, top grades, etc. And we are familiar with that point of view here in the United States, but it is definitely for most people balanced with the idea that, well, you also should be good in sports, and you also should join clubs in high school, by the way, which I did. I had a great club career in high school and college. I was very active.
So did I.
So I understand that. And, but well-rounded, that's it. So if that's what you want, that there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Some people get ahead that way. What I think is the problem, or certainly one of the problems, is to always look to these stellar examples like Bill Gates and just say, okay, this is the model that we're working with, where this is an infinitesimal number of students
Right.
Drop out at an early age. Another one has been in the news quite recently, associated with this rocket that just went up last night. That guy dropped out of, I don't know, he even may have dropped out of high school. Now he's worth billions, Okay, they get a lot of press, but why do they get a lot of press? They are extremely unusual. That's why they get a lot of press.
But they create an aspiration where and maybe it's parents that say, I don't want to pay $100,000 to send my kid to school. I'll give you $50,000. Go off and make your way in the world here. But there is a certain there's a romantic appeal for Americans that I can, again,
Absolutely.
the individual, I don't need the system. I don't need to conform. I'm the rule breaker. I'm the exception always. We all look at our children and we say, is he or she the one? Oh, that's the one.
Well, I wouldn't want to talk anybody out of that because, I guess my wife and I did it with our kids as well.
See, all right, you're an American.
But they all did extremely well in school and went to top universities. Trying to think.
It's an interesting question, and I think it goes to the core of the American character. I agree. We don't value education the same way. We don't drive our kids. We don't do.
We give it lip service, but it's not a driving passion for most people.
No,
Right.
And nor is it a source of great pride. You're happy, but if my kid becomes a major athlete or a movie star or a rock star, I'm probably through the roof. If my kid becomes a professor at Cal State Poly, I'm happy, but I don't run around and brag about it in the same way I do if my kid was a corporate CEO somewhere. I don't know. We view academics in a whole different light. I'll go back one further. I'm a big history buff and a political science buff. That's what I studied in college. And if you go back and look at the history of American politicians, big politicians, senators, governors, presidents, very few of them ever pushed the theme that they were well educated. Those that did, like Adlai Stevenson in the 50s, got trounced. They're eggheads
against a very popular guy.
Yeah, they're eggheads. What do they know? They're elites now today. Yeah. What do you think you know? You think you're so smart. We Americans, we love the Abraham Lincoln from a log cabin, Bill Clinton, the little boy from Hope, Arkansas, Barack Obama from nowhere. We love that Alger Horatio Alger's story from the 1800s, rags to riches, and that never goes through. Horatio Alger didn't get there because he got to college.
Yeah. I'd like to make a point about creativity.
Yes.
It's very, very common for people who want to say, education isn't anything. What's more important is creativity.
Right.
Creativity, look, first of all, it's a good thing. All right. I'm not against creativity. Hey, I'm sitting here writing books. I'm creating things. Right. So I don't think it's a bad thing. What I will say is this: creativity is a very excellent example of the values of individualism. It's an individual who creates, and the individual who does successfully create has really done a very admirable thing for other individualists.
Right.
The thing is that creativity in East Asia, they know the word, but it doesn't mean the same thing. Creativity for them is quite different. In the Drive to Learn toward the end, in the last chapter, I've got 4 or 5 pages about this where I go into more detail about this. But the thing about it is, when we say we're going to judge people on creativity,
right,
that's taking our values and judging people in other cultures by our values. And we got the right to do this, if indeed it can be called a right. We got the right to do this because, beginning in the late 40s and 50s and into the 60s, we were the dominant culture in the United States. This is when English became the lingua franca.
Right, for the world.
We were on top. There was no question about it. And so we can, and our people were creating things, and
everybody wants to be like us, we thought.
Henry Ford, and on and on and on. All these great examples that are actually just one in a million. So we sort of got to define how we're gonna evaluate the rest of the world. But, if the Chinese or the Japanese came along and said, well, they're going to, and maybe this is in the process of happening.
I think it is, yeah.
We're going to take over the world. We're going to be the dominant culture, and we're going to evaluate others on the basis of our standards. We probably wouldn't look very good, even if they said it in the basis of creativity, because the way they think about creativity is different from the way we think.
I think you're absolutely right. And I don't know, I've never been to China. I really don't know much about it other than what I read, which is tinted through Western rose-colored glasses here. But I suspect that they see themselves as having, which China never did historically, now has an aspiration to be on the world stage. That's why they're stepping up and investing in Africa and other places that they would have. Who cares?
Very determined.
And they're very determined. And there is, in certain political sense, a fight between a controlled top-down economy, whether it's communist or capitalist or whatever, but a control over economy versus freewheeling, messy democracy that is not well thought of in those parts of the world. Very individualistic, very locked, gridlock, very confusing, chaotic, all that kind of stuff. I wonder if we are in a battle of two systems, and depending on which one comes out on top in the next century, we're going to have a whole different discussion. If you came back 100 years in a time capsule,
could be, absolutely.
What does it all look like?
I'd
love to wrap it up here if we could, because I got a 9 o'clock show. I got a hard stop here in 5 minutes here. What do you think? I think it's fascinating. That's why we've had you so many times. Dr. Trinh sits and shakes his head. As much as he agrees with you, as much as I agree with you, we both go, but I don't want my kid to miss out. I want him to be well-rounded, and I want him to be happy, and I want them
you
to
go.
find their own path and be an individual.
So we're getting that.
We're getting what we asked for.
It's okay.
You can do
So
both.
maybe we shouldn't be beating our breasts over the fact that, we're not doing very well in the international comparative test. The fact is, we don't actually care about it that much.
We don't care. The takeaway, I'm not sure at the end of the day, some do. Politicians ramp us up and say our education system sucks. Look, we're ranked low. And most people go, as long as we're kind of in the middle. I don't want to be at the bottom. If I'm in the middle.
Robert Kiyosaki.
Good enough.
You guys have heard of Rich Dad, Poor Dad?
Sure.
Robert Kiyosaki, right? I'm a fan of his. I've read a lot of his books. And, he's got a Japanese heritage background. So he's a non-college guy as well. He went to the Marines, fought in Vietnam, and created this empire now of education and real estate and all these different things. So what's interesting is that Robert Kiyosaki says, and he's one of the guys that's blowing off education.
Yeah,
probably he didn't have a college degree,
right,
and he succeeded. But what he said is that you can go to school, you can get your degrees, you make an excellent employee. But what Robert Kiyosaki says sticks out in my mind is that he says the C students are usually the CEOs.
Yes.
Managing the A students who are good employees.
That's true.
Because the C students are the creative ones, right? The ones that are out of the box.
And the driven to succeed because they didn't get the academic credential. They didn't go to the big school. So there's sort of a chip on their shoulder. I'm going to show the world. And
Well, it's simplifying things that are actually very complex.
Well, that's what we do best in American media is we take complex things.
That's right.
No, but I'm totally with you, Dr. Grove. With the mindset and the value of education, and it explains really why East Asians score better on tests and they
it explains a lot. Whether or not we want to change is up to us, but it's the mirror you've held up reflects well. How do they get your books? I got to wrap this up. So how do they find you?
Okay.
How do they reach you?
Thank you.
How do they give us the name of the books and real quickly?
Show us the books. Do you have the books here? Take a look.
Yeah, let's hold up the books and we can.
Folks can get this on. They can get this on Amazon, right?
Any place that sells books, you can get these books. They are not self-published.
No, these are real deals.
By a real publisher.
It's a real deal.
I don't know if I'm holding this right because I took off my.
That's good.
This is The Drive to Learn.
Okay.
The Drive to Learn. You can see it's not all that big.
Right.
Not a big book.
Don't be scared.
The other is A Mirror for Americans.
Yes.
Love
Mirror
it.
for Americans. Again,
Yeah.
both books under 200 pages. Imagine that.
Consumable.
I like reading under 200 pages.
Yeah, we're all got ADD. We can't read War and Peace anymore here. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We never had anyone on 4 times.
Never will again, probably here. I can't imagine.
And we're gonna do it again. Let's go for like number 5. I'm sure there's so much more to talk about here with this. Well, we got to continue this Robert Kiyosaki versus the Asian good student debate.
Yeah, because that's really it's the myth of America is that college doesn't lead to great success. It might get you a job, but the real high achievers are the ones who drop out. Go West, young man. Horatio Alger in the 1800s, Henry Ford, Andrew Carnegie, on and on, Bill Gates. None of these guys made their fortune through college and through education.
Yeah, well, they get a lot of attention because they're unusual.
Yeah, that's true. They're rare.
They're rare.
As are you, Dr. Trinh. You're a rare find. And I mean, and Dr. Grove, thank you for coming on. All right.
Thank you, guys.
Take care.
Appreciate it very much.
All right.
Take care.
We'll do this again, number 5.
Well, you talk to Paul.
Well, we'll see. Come back again. We'll find out if there's more in this discussion. It certainly goes to the core of who we are, which is really what Health Talks is all about. Get to the core of what we're all about. Are we living a healthy life? Are we happy? It all comes back to the Health Talks we have here each and every week with Dr. Trinh, right here in Orange County's only community radio station, octalkradio.net. Streaming live from the University of California, Irvine's Beale Applied Innovation Center.